Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. A very warm good morning to everyone. I hope all of you are doing good. I welcome you all to today's session of the Hindu Newspaper Analysis. It's 10 a.m. once again, meaning that it's time to analyze the day's Hindu newspaper, see what are the important news stories here from both the mains and the prelims examination point of view. I'm very glad to see that all of you have been regular here and also requesting you to please take out some time and also make sure that you practice the question that we give at the end of each class. There's an answer writing portal where the students can submit these answers. They can check each other's answers as well. The link is in the description of this video. Now let's see what is it that we have for you today. But before that, again reminding you, we have an ongoing Target Prelims 2024 crash course that is running on YouTube, where every evening at 7 p.m. we have a class where we discuss what are the kind of questions that are expected in this year's prelims examination. It's a subject-wise class. Today is 23rd, so we'll have a class on Indian economy. Then we have classes remaining for international relations, medieval history, science and tech, geography, etc. So please do join in for that as well. Let's see what are topics that we have taken up for today. The first topic that we have is about Russia-China relations. There was a recent summit in Beijing where the Russian president was invited. This year marks the 75th year completion of the diplomatic relationship between Russia and China. In the past few years, these two have become extremely close. A couple of years back in 2022, there was a joint statement that came in that the two sides are in a friendship that has no limit, and that is how the no limit phrase became famous about Russia and China. We'll be discussing the status of that relation, the past history, and the impact that it has on India right now. The second article is about inflation that we are seeing in vegetables mainly. Which vegetables? Tomato, onion and potatoes. Why is it that the prices are so volatile and what can be done to stop this volatility? The third article is about voter turnout data. We have discussed similar article just a few days back, but there are some other details as well that we'll be discussing. What does it mean? Why are there so many objections about the Election Commission of India delaying submitting this data, and what is it that the Supreme Court is now hearing? From the prelims exam point of view, some European countries, Ireland, Norway and Spain are all set to formally recognize Palestine as a nation. Second, RBI has decided to transfer a record surplus of over 2 lakh crore to the centre government for financial year 2024. And in the end, BIMSTEC, finally after years and years of existence since 1997, has finally got a charter and it has become a legal personality. So let's begin with the first article. The first article, as I said, is about Russia-China relations. Now, as you know, in the past few years, specifically, the two countries have been coming very close. Especially ever since the Ukraine-Russia war has started, with the Western countries imposing a lot of sanctions on Russia, Russia has been in search of new friends. Now, we keep on hearing in the news that India has been buying a lot of oil from Russia, which is true. But the reality is that from Russia, the country that is buying the most oil is actually China. So China has actually become the best friend of Russia, or the major supporter of Russia right now. A lot of support for the war that Russia needs is actually coming in from China. That is why the relationship between the two have blossomed. The interesting part, however, is unlike in the past, where in this relationship Russia used to be the elder brother, China used to be the younger brother. Now the role has been reversed. It is China that is the driver of this relationship. China is a much bigger economy, much bigger military right now as compared to Russia. So the two sides are still very good friends. However, it's China that is taking the call. The history between the two nations is very interesting. If you look at the history of it, the first assumption that most people make is that both of these are or used to be communist nations. Now, if capitalist countries were together in West, then obviously China and Russia should also have been together, or Soviet Union and China should have been together, but that is not always the case. The reason is, when China developed into a communist country after the communist revolution of China, rather than adopting the same model of communism that existed in USSR, Chinese actually made some changes in their model. And there was a rivalry between China and USSR about who shall be the true communist leader, who shall give the orders that the other communist countries shall follow. USSR said that they are the country where communism originated, so they should be the one. China on the other hand said that no, they are more powerful. Anyways, so the point is that both of them have had a history of clashes between each other. It is only now that they have become the best of friends. But earlier, we used to see a lot of clashes, disputes between the two. In fact, both the sides have had territorial disputes as well. For example, it was in 1969 that Russia and China had clashes over the Ussuri River border dispute. So it's not that the two sides have always had great relationship. Other interesting part that we must remind ourselves is relationship between China and the Western countries was not always the way it is right now. Right now you assume that the Western countries are opposed to China, they are trying to stop the progress of China, which may be true. But in the past, Western countries have also tried to take advantage of China's progress. Very famously in 1972, the American President Richard Nixon actually came to China. That was the first major visit of a big Western country's leader coming into China. This was seen as a lifting of kind of embargo on China, where the Western countries decided that we want to engage with China. After that, we saw a lot of investment coming into China, lot of technological transfer. Remember, this was still an era of the Cold War. So USSR was still against the Western countries, and those Western countries were trying to come close to China. Meaning that in that era, China and USSR did not really have close relationship. So the relationship between the two sides have always been on seesaw. Sometimes the West comes and interfere, sometimes it's a rivalry between the two sides itself. The current phase, however, where the two sides have been best of friends, began in 2012. This is when US became alarmed of Chinese progress, where they launched their famous pivot to Asia policy. Since then, Russia and China have found common grounds on a lot of issues. So much so that in 2022, they called the relationship as having no limits. Since then, there have been multiple meetings. In fact, we have seen Vladimir Putin does not really go out of Russia that often now. He only goes to China. Similarly, Xi Jinping does not really want to go out of China except going to Russia. So these are the two countries that have come extremely close. As I said, the only difference between this and earlier relationship is now China is the driving force. They are the ones that are helping Russia much more than the other way around. So Russia needs more help of China rather than China needing more help of Russia as of now. In the last 2 years, a lot of things have happened. Their trade, for example, has reached $240 billion. Russia, as I told you earlier, is the biggest supplier of crude to China now. China has traded much higher with US as well. So China right now is basically balancing out both these things. On one hand, they are balancing out Russia, and on the other hand, they are still continuing their heavy trade with the US. In comparison, if you look at India's trading numbers, that are obviously much lower. India's trade with both China and the US last year was around $118 billion. With Russia, it was about $66 billion. Now, please understand, this number is artificially inflated because of oil. In usual years, when I say usual years, for example, before the Ukraine-Russia war had started, India-Russia trade was not even $20 billion. It was below $20 billion as well. So it was mainly driven by weapon and not more than that. Some about food products, some about minerals, etc. Jewelry, but most of it, or a large part of it, the trade that you see today is actually driven by crude oil, and that only happened after the Ukraine-Russia war had begun. Right now, China is important for Russia because Russia wants supply of a lot of minerals from China. China is also sending to Russia dual-use materials. On the other hand, what does China want in return? See, not just China, but no country in the world is good enough to just keep on giving you favors. They always want something in return. China also obviously wants something in return from Russia. If they're supplying all this technology, they want something in return. What do they want? They want to explore far off areas in Russia and see if they can come up with more energy supplies. They also want to ensure that they can get the nuclear technology and space technology from Russia, which Russia has one of the most advanced in the world. And this is where the two sides fit into each other like a jigsaw puzzle. On the other hand, there are many experts that say that continuation of war might work in favor of China. Many people say that Xi Jinping should have acted as a mediator because Ukraine and Russia, both of them have good relationship with China. But maybe China right now wants the war to continue because it will make Russia dependent on China. It will ensure cheaper supply of oil from Russia, and China would not mind that. Now, what about India? That is the most important point for us. What about India? Where do we stand? What is the impact? In an ideal world, India obviously would not like Russia to be very close to China. You have a great friend that you're dependent on over the years, and all of a sudden that great friend is now coming closer to your enemy. You obviously will not like it. However, in international relations, international politics, you can't force a country to choose their friends or enemies because of how you think. The best that India can do and is doing is diversify our own interest. That is why we are becoming much more assertive in groups such as Quad, I2U2, etc. We have been trying to have a more robust relationship with countries such as Japan, US, Australia, etc. However, having said that, our dependence on Russia cannot be cut off. The reason being that even today, after a lot of diversification, even today, a lot of our defense industry, defense equipment is dependent on Russia. The other thing that you have to understand is, just because we have bought something from Russia doesn't mean that the relationship is over. The materials that you buy, let's say tanks or aircrafts or missiles, etc., they have a life of 40, 50, 60 years. In those 40, 50, 60 years, you need to be in relationship with Russia because you would need their repair, you would need some spare parts in the future, you would need some technology to be upgraded in the future. So it's not that you can just buy and then shut off. That is why even if we bought something from Russia 10 years back, we still have to continuously be in touch with Russia to ensure that it has a good supply of spare parts and any mechanics that we would require. And that is why India's dependence on Russia cannot be cut off no matter what we say right now. India also is Russia's biggest defense market. So on their end also they would not want India to go away from them. But obviously right now where we stand, China is much more important to Russia as compared to India. Now what can India do? From here on, where do we go? First, as India has been doing, focus on multilateral engagement. How do we do that? BRICS, SCO, these are organizations where we engage with China and Russia. Then we also engage with US in Quad, I2U2. We have also been coming close to US by signing a lot of other treaties. That is something that India has to continue doing, because in this kind of an environment, you cannot depend on any one single country. Also, India should focus on enhancing its own economic ties with China and Russia. There is no point saying that no, we will not talk to them, or no, they are not good enough for us. All these countries have to work in their own national interest. And in India's national interest, we have to forge a better relationship with them. As Atal Bihari Vajpayee very famously had said, you can choose your friends, but you cannot choose your neighbors. The reality is that China is and will always be our neighbor, and that is why we have to accept that fact that if we can forge a good relationship with them, it will be beneficial for us. We can have regional measures, collaborate with other countries such as Japan, South Korea, which India has been doing, and have some other strategic partnerships as well. For example, India has been increasingly active in the Indo-Pacific. We have been trying to reach out to other countries that are also on odd terms with China, such as Philippines. We are selling them defense equipment as well. So all that can be a good way forward. I also wanted to show some data to you about how India is actually reliant on Russia for our defense equipment. Look at this. India's suppliers of weapons between 2017 and 2021, 46% came from Russia. Despite all the talks about India buying weapons from France, Israel, US, majority of India's weapons still come from Russia, and that is a cause of concern, and that's why we are dependent on them. In this, the overwhelming majority of Russian equipment can be seen in tanks and mechanized infantry. Look at this. Out of the total 67 tank regiments that India has, 65 of them are of Russian origin. Mechanized infantry, 30 out of 30 are of Russian origin. So this is where again India has to make sure that we diversify our buying so that we are not dependent on any one single country for the future. Moving on to the second article for the day. The second article for the day focuses on one very simple plain topic. The idea is inflation in vegetables. It talks about how our vegetable prices have been increasing. Specifically, it talks about TOP. TOP stands for tomato, onion and potato. The author here has been talking about inflation in these three specifically, and there are reasons why inflation takes place in these three. There are reasons why farmers who are cultivating vegetables are under a lot of pressure. See, India anyways does not have any MSP for the vegetables. When you don't have any MSP for vegetables, and secondly, vegetables are perishable goods. As in, if I am a farmer, I have grown, let's say, onion or tomato, I know I have to sell it in a short period of time before they start going bad. If they start going bad, then there is no use of me. The buyer, on the other hand, knows that I am under pressure. The buyer knows that if he does not buy it from me today, he can wait for 5 days or 1 week. I will be under so much pressure, I will reduce the prices myself because I have to sell it, otherwise they will go bad. Not a lot of farmers have access to cold chains. If you have cold storage, then you can elongate the life of vegetables. But most farmers in India don't have any access to cold storage, and that is what becomes a problem here. Just because you are getting onions at 100 rupees per kg in the market does not mean the farmer is getting 100 rupees. Farmer might still be getting 10-12 rupees per kg, and in most cases not even that much. The farmers is not getting benefited out of that high prices. It's actually in between the middlemen that comes into the picture. This is the problem here. The author here talks about how our consumer price index tells us about inflation in India. It measures the country's cost of living. This CPI basket has about 299 items, out of which vegetables are about 6.04%. In these vegetables, the three vegetables that account for most of it are tomato, onion and potato, which have about 2.2% weightage in the overall consumer price index market. This is why any change in prices of these three can have a major impact on our cost of living. You will see any increase in price of onion or tomatoes, which is seasonal now, becomes national news. There have been instances in the past that these have become election issues. There was a very famous Delhi election when Sushma Swaraj was alive and she was fighting for Chief Minister of Delhi. There was a very famous election when she made it an entire election campaign that onion prices are increasing and I'll stop it. So vegetables, because they are consumed in such large numbers, especially common vegetable like tomato, onion, potato, any increase in their prices becomes a major cause of concern. And as you can see here, there is a big fluctuation in these prices, be it potato, onion and tomato, and because they are consumed in almost every household. Okay, onion may not be consumed in every household, some people avoid onion, but tomato, potato are consumed in almost every household. That is why, as per the author, the government has to make sure that the fluctuation, the variation in these prices stop. Now, if you look at some numbers, financial year 23-24 vegetable prices in India increased by about 15%. There is something called the coefficient of variation in inflation that tells us about how volatile the market has been, about how the prices have been fluctuating. For these three vegetables, the coefficient of volatility has been 5.2, which is much higher than normally for vegetable, which is 3. So for other vegetable, this is about 3.0. For these three specifically, it has been 5.2, which is a very high rating when it comes to coefficient of variation. This is what the government has to now look into. The suggestion that the author here gives: first, obviously, as I said, invest more in infrastructure, invest more in cold storage, to elongate the life of these perishable goods. Because if a farmer does not have cold storage, the farmer knows that after taking out potatoes or tomatoes, he or she has to sell it within a week or so, or maybe less than a week or so, to get a good price. That puts a lot of pressure, and that gives an advantage to the buyer here, and that has to stop. These vegetables anyways are perishable and are affected by a lot of biotic and abiotic factors. Government can also think about introducing MSP in such cases, but again, the point here is the same, that government introduces MSP, for example, for grains, rice, wheat, etc. But they can be stored in godowns for many days, many weeks, many months also. But these vegetables, since these are perishable, they have to be sold, consumed very quickly until they are in good health. And that is why investment in cold storage, having more profit in cultivation, etc., giving more money to the farmers, that will be the good way forward in order to stop distress from the farmers and in order to ensure that the eventual prices are not fluctuating so much. This is how basically you calculate the coefficient of variation. It is CV is equal to standard deviation divided by mean. That is how we calculate, and as we saw, for these three variables it was 5.2, for other variable it was 3.0. I also wanted to tell you something that the government had done in the past about these three variables especially. In 2018, the government launched something called Operation Greens. So it was way back in 2018. It was announced on the lines of Operation Flood. 500 crore rupees were given to promote farmer producer organizations, their logistics, etc., specifically focusing on tomato, onion and potato. Again, it is a good beginning, but again, first 500 crore is not a huge sum considering the scale of India, especially India's agriculture. And after that, it was not repeated. So there was a beginning about 5-6 years ago, but it did not really come, or did not really bring any long-term results as such. It requires much more long-term intervention as compared to what the government has done so far. Also, the government after that announced that it will be a part of Atmanirbhar Bharat package. So the farmers, as you know, under COVID-19 crisis, were transferred some money from the government side. So these farmers who grow tomato, onion, potato were also transferred certain amount of money. Cold storage still remains a big issue in India. Since it requires a lot of money to be put in, the government has to step it up. The next article is on the voting turnout. Now, we did have a similar discussion on this in one of the earlier CNAs, but we'll just have another discussion and maybe discuss it from another point of view here as well. Now, the voter turnout in the current ongoing Lok Sabha election is slightly less than what we have seen in the past. Again, not a very great difference, but slightly less. We are not going into politics of it. Political debates are that if we have a low voter turnout, does it support the ruling party, does it support the opposition, etc. We are not concerned with that. We are not poll predictors here. That's not a concern for the examination. What we are concerned here with is a controversy that has started with regards to Election Commission of India. What is the controversy all about? The controversy is regarding a form called Form 17C. In fact, now the Supreme Court is about to hear the matter on 24th of May. Now, what exactly is this issue all about? So basically the rule is, after the election at a specific booth is over, the election commission, their agent, the agent of the election commission who is conducting the election, the presiding officer, who will be there on the voting booth at the end of the election, they have to give a Form 17C to the agent of the candidate. So every candidate who is fighting the election has an agent that sits on that voting booth throughout the day to greet the voters who come in, to convince them to vote for their candidate. Now, at the end of the day, Form 17C is given to the agent. What is Form 17C? It is nothing but a record of how many votes were polled. Not how many votes did you get, because they can't tell that, but how many people came in, how many votes were polled. Now, this is a very common practice. It has been happening. But what has happened now is some candidates are saying that Election Commission is not giving them this Form 17C. That Form 17C is not being handed over to them. They are being delayed. Then there are allegations that Election Commission of India should just upload this Form 17C online of every polling booth within 48 hours so that anyone can see. But Election Commission of India has not done that. Then there are other allegations that have come about voting percentage. Means at the end of the day when the voting stops, the Election Commission of India announces what was the voting percentage. These are not these are not final numbers, but they, for example, say at the end of the day that the voting percentage was about 60%. Final number they might calculate and give after 1 or 2 days, but they give a provisional number, and the final number is very close to this. There may be a very decimal point different, but final number is close to this only. What has happened this time around is, number one, Election Commission has given the final number after 10-12 days in some cases. Rather than giving in 1 or 2 days, they are taking 10-12 days to give the final number. And secondly, in the final number and in the provisional number, there is a big difference. Like in the provisional number, on the end of the day, they will say 60% people came to vote. Final number, they will say 65% came to vote. So 5% is a huge variation. This is what is happening. So first controversy, Form 17C is not being given. That is what some candidates say. Election Commission of India should update this on the website. This is a case filed in the court by an NGO called ADR. You would have heard about this. They publish a lot of reports. So Association of Democratic Reforms has gone to Supreme Court. That Supreme Court should ask the Election Commission that you should upload all the Form 17Cs within 48 hours on your website so that anyone can download it. Now, Form 17C is important. Why? As I said, because it gives the data about how many people came out to vote. There are mainly two forms, 17A and 17C. 17A talks about who came to vote and who did not come to vote. So it has individual voter data. This is not given to candidate because it has individual data, who came to vote, who did not come to vote. Because when you come to vote, they have the election list and they basically mark, okay, you have come to vote, you have not come to vote. So 17A has individual data, that who has come to vote and who has not. Candidates will not get this. 17C is a general data. 17C is a data about how many people came to vote. This is something that is given to the polling agent of the candidate at the close of the polling. This is something that is not being given in many of the constituencies. It is being delayed. Form 17C contains a number of EVMs that were used, total number of voters that were supposed to come here, total number of voters that entered here. All these are data points that are included in form number 17C. Candidates can then use these forms to verify on the day of the counting whether the same number of EVMs are counted or not. For example, if Form 17C said that, let's say, 25 EVMs were used here today, because every EVM has a limit to how many votes it can count. So they can verify on the day of the counting were all the EVMs counted or not. This is the significance of Form 17C. Some candidates are saying that they are being denied that. Second allegation about the polling data. As I told you earlier, provisional data and final data usually does not have a lot of difference, but this is a time that a lot of difference is being seen. For example, in the first phase of the election, on the day of the election, Election Commission said that voting percentage was 60%. But the final data was released after or rather in about 11 days, 12 days of time. On the 30th of April, they released the final data, and then they said the voting percentage was 66.14. So how is it that there's such a huge variation in provisional data and final data? That is a cause of concern. Same happened in the second phase. In the second phase, first the number came out 60.96% on the day of the voting. Then they said that 66.71% people had come out. So the opposition party is raising questions that why is this happening? The interesting part is that very few days just before the election, we had new election commissioners appointed. And when something like this happens, old election commissioners resign, new election commissioners are appointed, they again, a lot of questions are raised on those issues. And that is why there have been a plea filed in the Supreme Court about the role of the Election Commission. What does the Election Commission of India say? They say that we have no obligation as per the law to give you information. We will not publish it online, because if we publish it online or we hand over this information, it can be misused as well. They say that disclosure of Form 17C can create confusion in the minds of the people. How? I don't know, only Election Commission knows. On the other hand, the NGO that has filed the plea, that is the Association of Democratic Reforms, they want the Supreme Court to give an order to Election Commission to publish all the Form 17Cs within 48 hours on their website, so that, see, not every candidate can afford to have an agent at every polling station. Let's say there are some independent candidates who are fighting elections. They don't have a lot of money. They may not have a person who will sit there as a polling agent. Or maybe there is no polling agent by the end of the day. So they also should have the right to get this form, and it will be easily available if it is published or it is just uploaded online. That is the idea of this particular plea in the Supreme Court. Whether the Supreme Court accepts it or not, it remains to be seen. Now, I also wanted to share information with you about how the declaration of voter turnout actually happens. You as a common public can also track it. For example, there is a specific module called ENCORE, enabling communication on real-time environment. It involves data entry of 2 hourly estimated poll percentage. So after every 2 hours, the data is input. It is an application that Election Commission uses to ensure that there is transparency in the numbers. It can be accessed by all the officers of Election Commission of India, state, district and constituency level as well. These entries need to be filled at 9 a.m., 11 a.m., 1, 3, 5 and 7 p.m. So again, as I said, every alternate hour the data entry is done. That is why you see at the, let's say at 11 a.m. or 1 p.m., you will see headlines on the news that till 1 p.m. this many voting percentage has happened. Till 3 p.m. these many people have voted. You will never see at 2 p.m. You will never see at 12 p.m. It's only odd numbers, because that is when the data actually comes into this system, and this is where the news websites actually take their data from. Now, how does it work? The voter turnout can be monitored by the citizens as well. There is an app called Voter Turnout app. So if you are so interested, you can download this app and you can see the voting percentage in real time. At the end of the poll, system allows entries of detailed turnout reports constituency wise and polling station wise as well. This simplifies the data entry of 2 hourly voter turnout. It helps in giving out information real time. So there are a lot of processes in place so that nothing wrong should go or nothing wrong should happen. But again, it remains to be seen what the Supreme Court decides in this matter. These were the articles from the mains exam point of view. Now from prelims point of view, the first article, 3 European countries, Spain, Norway and Ireland, are all set to formally recognize the statehood of Palestine. A majority of countries already recognize Palestine, including India. We also recognize Palestine as a country, but many European countries did not do that earlier. Now, a lot of countries which are not supporting Israel's actions or Israel's planning to invade some other parts of Gaza, they are now taking action against Israel. Some of them are even supporting action in the International Criminal Court, as we discussed a couple of days back. In International Criminal Court, there is a plea filed to have an arrest warrant issued against Netanyahu. Some countries are supporting that as well. Israel obviously does not like it. It does not like the fact that Ireland, Norway and Spain are now going ahead and recognizing Palestine as a country. The official recognition would most probably happen by 28th of May. As I told you, most of the countries do recognize the statehood of Palestine anyway. Apart from this, very recently in the UN, about 143 out of 193 members had actually supported that Palestine should be given full membership of the UN. So right now, Palestine is not a full-fledged member of the UN. It is a participant. It has been given a non-member status. It's not a member. When these 143 countries voted in favor, India also voted in favor. So India usually does vote in favor of Palestine's official membership of the UN. It is vetoed obviously by the US. So it has not been done so far. As you can see, these are the countries that recognize Palestine. So India is one of them. Most of the countries around the world do recognize Palestine. US obviously does not. As you can imagine, countries in the Middle East, West Asia, all of them do. In Africa also, South America also, most of the countries do recognize Palestine. US does not, Canada does not, Australia does not. There are some countries that still do not recognize Palestine. Now, a few things about the status of Palestine. Number one, what is its current status in the UN? So in 2012, they became non-member observer state, similar to the Vatican. So they do participate in General Assembly debates. They don't vote, etc. But they do participate in debates. If they do get full UN membership, they will get voting rights. That will be very important for them. And they will participate in all the UN functions, just like any other country. It will also support their demand for complete sovereignty and statehood at the international stage. So that is a change. These three countries, so when a country recognizes another country, what usually happens is, when you recognize some other country, it obviously gives you more confidence that now you can engage with other countries. It can also lead to opening up of embassies. It can also lead to better relationship, be it trade, be it their people come into your country, because when you recognize them, only then you will give them visa to come to your country. If I don't recognize a certain country, why would I give a visa to their country's passport? So all these things, avenues open up when other countries do recognize you. Next article, good news for the government of India. The money is raining. The RBI will transfer highest ever 2,10,874 crore surplus to the center government. This is not a new thing. Every single year, the profit that the RBI makes, significant part of it is transferred to the government. This time around, it is the highest ever profit that will be transferred. It is over 2 lakh crore rupees for the first time. Last time the transfer was about 87,000 crore rupees. This time around, RBI did expect a much better transfer than last year, but expectation was about 1,70,000 crore, but it has gone much beyond that. Also, RBI has decided to increase the contingent risk buffer to 6.5%. What is this? So, whatever profit the RBI makes, they don't transfer the entire money to the government. They keep a slight part of it for buffer, for emergency purposes. So now it is 6.5%. This is usually between 5.5 and 6.5%. RBI decides how much buffer they want to keep. Between 5.5 to 6.5, they have decided to keep it at 6.5 right now. This transferable amount or the amount transfer, basically it's a part of a recommendation given by a committee headed by BIMSTEC. This was in 2019. The committee came up with economic capital framework. Do remember that. They recommended how the money should be transferred, how much money should the RBI keep with itself. The committee recommended that RBI should maintain 6.5 to 5.5% as a buffer and should transfer the surplus funds. In that year, 1,76,000 was transferred to the government, then 1,23,000. Then in the COVID year, obviously it lowered down, but now it has again come up and given the government a boatload of money. Good news for the government. It basically gives a chance for the government to spend more money in a lot of other infrastructure projects. This is how, in short, it usually works. RBI's profits are given to the government because it's a government-owned entity. There are different committees that have suggested different things in the past. There was the Usha Thorat committee of 2004, which said that RBI should keep 18% of its assets with itself. Then there was a Malegam committee. But it was in 2019 that the BIMSTEC committee decided that majority of the funds should be transferred, and this is what is happening right now. The government obviously likes it because before this, every committee suggested that the RBI should keep a larger sum of money with itself and don't transfer so much money. But BIMSTEC committee sided with the government that the government does deserve much more money from the surplus of the RBI. Last news, BIMSTEC, that has been in existence in 1997, has finally got its official charter. Why has it taken so long? I don't know, ask their leaders. Now, interestingly, BIMSTEC, although it's an old group since 1997, but it has not been a lot in the news till recently. what happened recently? So ever since the attack that Pakistan has been carrying out on India, the Pathankot airbase attack most specifically, after that SAARC summits have not happened. India has boycotted SAARC summits since 2016, and ever since India has basically kind of ignored SAARC, India has been giving a lot more attention to groups such as BIMSTEC. So BIMSTEC has kind of revived after 2016, not because of something that they did, but because countries such as India wanted to give more attention to groups such as BIMSTEC, where Pakistan does not really exist, rather than focusing on SAARC. Now finally, they have gotten a charter. Before they had a charter, the problem was when you don't have an official charter or a constitution, you cannot admit new members because you don't have any rules, etc. You cannot become a part of any larger group. Like for example, you saw African Union became a part of G20. So such like that, BIMSTEC cannot become part of any group because they did not have their own charter. So now all those possibilities have opened up. They can become part of other groups, other countries can join in BIMSTEC as well. It will come into force, or it has come into force rather on the 5th summit of BIMSTEC leaders that was headed by Thailand. The countries in BIMSTEC include Bangladesh, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Thailand, Myanmar and India. So as you can see, taking out Pakistan, Afghanistan, most of the SAARC countries are anyways covered in BIMSTEC. These kind of groups, when they adopt a charter, it has to be ratified in the member countries. Nepal was the last one. Their parliament ratified the BIMS charter recently, and that is how the BIMS charter, or BIMSTEC charter rather, has come into force now. The work started on it in 2022. Now Nepal has also ratified it, and now it has officially come into force. This is what BIMSTEC looks like. It is about 22% of the world's population, India obviously being the largest and the most dominant member of BIMSTEC. The first summit was held in Thailand, and Thailand is the current chairman as well. There are 6 focus areas of BIMSTEC: trade, technology, energy, transport, tourism and fisheries. It is focused on countries that surround the Bay of Bengal. This brings us to the end of today's discussion. Here are a couple of practice questions. First question is on the growing friendship of Russia and China and how it impacts India. Second question is on the independence of the Election Commission of India. I hope you enjoyed the session, you learned something new today. Do hit the subscribe button if you have not done so till now. Do join us tomorrow as well at 10 a.m. for the next session of the Hindu Newspaper Analysis. Have a good day ahead. Bye-bye. Jai Hind.